Welcome to Geocache Adventures, the podcast where we explore everything geocaching. I'm your host, Shadow Dragon 1. I love geocaching. If you're listening to this, you probably love it too. If you enjoy the podcast, consider sharing it with somebody that you think would love it. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and there's a Facebook group as well, so you can join in the fun and share your adventures. There's also a Patreon page that you can join and unlock exclusive content. Hey everybody, Amy Shadow Dragon 1 here. It is October and Halloween is right around the corner, and as I said in the last episode, Halloween is my favoriteest holiday ever. So a little more Halloween fun would be something spooky like cemeteries, right? So I thought it would be really fun to revisit the interview I did in season 2 with Leah from the Remnant Stew podcast. She's a host of the Remnant Stew podcast and a fellow geocacher, and she loves a good cemetery cache. I really enjoyed recording this interview with her back in season 2, and I thought it would be a great way to continue the Halloween fun on the podcast by having another visit with it. So here's that interview. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Amy Shadow Dragon 1 here, and with me today is fellow geocacher and fellow podcaster, Leah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
So I always like to ask my guest, what's your geocaching name, and how did you get started geocaching?
Well, I just recently changed my geocaching name. I started geocaching with my kids. I have 4 kids, and honestly, taking them anywhere, like the movies or bowling and doing anything with 4 kids, you have to take out a loan.
Yeah.
So when I found out about geocaching, I thought that is perfect because it's free and it's fun and it's intriguing and interesting. And so I started doing it with my 4 kids, and their interest in it, they loved it, but their interest in it waned, whereas mine stayed. And so here recently, because of my podcast and because the listeners are the curiosity seekers and they would be geocachers, we did this big campaign where we sent out trackables. And so when I sent out did the trackable campaign called Release the Kraken, I changed my podcast name I changed my geocaching name to my podcast name. So it's Remnant Stew. That's who I am on the geocaching website.
And for those who may not get the Kraken reference, your guys' mascot and your logo is Sir Kraken, and he's in kind of like a soup bowl holding a wooden spoon.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Which is adorable.
We're weird and quirky, and our podcast is all about turning off the news and tuning into something curious.
And so I listen to it, and you guys have some really just I don't know where you get I know you guys get stuff from Atlas Obscura, but you get like the most random stuff.
We do.
You really do. And every once in a while you get something that I've heard about, and then I get so excited because it's like, I've actually heard of that before.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And that's who our listeners are the people that love to it's the geocachers. It's the people that love to not just live the day-to-day drudgery of everyday life of going to work and going to sleep and getting up and doing the same thing every day. It's the people that love to get out and experience life a little bit more adventurous and more on curiosity side. So there you go.
So how are your Krakens that you have released into the wild doing? Have they officially launched?
So I sent out 50, and honestly, I haven't mailed out all 50, and some of them came back because I sent them overseas, and it just kind of got crazy. But just a couple of them came back, whereas most of them went. Anyway, so they are out there. I had one, this was really interesting. I'm kind of new to trackables, and so I have all of these out there, and this geocacher picked it up, and I want to say it was in Iceland. It was one of them in Iceland. Picked it up and took it from cache to cache to cache to cache, like 4 pages on the geocaching website of different caches they just took it to.
Yeah.
And didn't drop. That was really interesting, but they dropped it yesterday. So it's traveling
Okay.
around Iceland, and I have some up in Canada, and I have some over in Georgia, and they're all over the place. It's awesome. I love it.
So look for a Kraken near you.
That's right.
And you're going to talk with us today about, and I believe they're one of your favorite cache types, a cemetery cache.
Absolutely. I love cemetery caches. I love cemeteries. And I'm not really, goth or spooky or anything like that, but I absolutely love cemeteries. I have been visiting cemeteries even before I was caching, and I know that there's a lot of we're going to talk about the controversy a little bit. If they're
A
controversial
little bit of one, yeah.
caches, right?
Yeah. So real plain and simple, a cemetery cache is just a geocache that's hidden in or relatively near a cemetery. That's simple.
Right. And I know that we're in the same geocaching groups, and we've seen people argue
Yes.
about the cemeteries. A lot of people think that it's against the rules.
It is interesting how, and I get for some people, cemeteries in general are just kind of creepy. They get creeped out by it. It's a reminder of your own mortality, and they don't want
Right.
to go there. But yeah, there are some people that just find it downright disrespectful and rude.
Well, and I can understand that to a certain degree, but I think that you really can't talk about cemeteries without talking about death. And I think that, in my opinion, my uneducated and it doesn't stop me from having an opinion. I really feel like as a society, at least in America, we have really separated ourselves from death. We don't prepare our dead like they used to. I mean, I remember my mother-in-law telling me that when she was a little girl, she, as the oldest of all of her siblings, she got to take part in preparing her grandmother for burial. And it kind of freaked her out a little bit as a little kid. She was 9 years old.
Yeah.
But she got to braid her grandmother's hair. Yeah, I mean, to us nowadays, that's so weird. That is such a bizarre thing. But
In the US, yeah.
she really cherished it. She really cherished it. And so as we've gotten, more and more modern, and we pay for services that we would have normally done ourselves, we've really gotten away from dealing with death face to face. And but it wasn't that long ago that cemeteries were picnic places. Like families would get together. It was more like a park, a very manicured, park.
Yeah.
And families would go and visit their loved ones and picnic, and the kids would run and play, and it wasn't a taboo thing to have fun in a cemetery. So there's that. But I do know that there are some cemeteries that are closed to anyone that is not a mourner or has someone interred there.
Yeah.
But I think that that's more of a sad statement to vandalism and disrespect than anything else. I love spending time in cemeteries, and I have a daughter that's 13, and I have taken. We live in a historic little historic town in Texas. It's one of the oldest. It's Montgomery, and it has 3 historic cemeteries, and we've been to all 3. And the history is crazy. So when you're in the cemetery, you get a sense of the history of the place, and it's peaceful. And without getting too far into the woo or whatever, I feel a connection to the people that had gone on before, even though my family isn't from this area,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not my family. But there's Civil War soldiers in there. There are people that died of yellow fever, and that's a connection to the history of this area, and I love it. I love that connection.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say, they feel, regardless of what your spiritual belief is or whatever, they feel more connected to that spirituality when they're in a graveyard or
Right.
cemetery because of what that means to them. So a lot of it, I think it really is just about perspective of the cemetery. And I will admit, my very first cemetery cache, we never grew up going to cemeteries to visit. We just
Right.
didn't. My family just didn't. I know a lot of families don't really do that. It just kind of depends on your background. But the first cemetery cache I did, it felt a little weird to me. And I debated
Right.
actually doing it because that was just something you just didn't do. You go to the cemetery and visit a grave, but there was just never, it was never really anything that we ever thought about to go. Just, it was just not a natural thing for me to just go to a cemetery and just walk around for the heck of it.
Right.
And it actually took me to a memorial monument that I had no clue was there. And it was actually it was actually for a tragedy for a local historical bridge, and a tragedy that had happened. And there was, I forget, I think it was 12 workers or so died during that. And there was this monument there to memorialize that. I had no clue about the bridge even, because that bridge doesn't exist anymore.
See, yeah, see, and then it tied you to the history of the place.
Yeah.
I think
And
that is absolutely cool.
it was neat. It was very interesting to learn about that. And then, like you said, you in especially larger ones that have been around for a while, it's very interesting. It's almost like a timeline of the gravestone markers, where you can see the old ones and then they just eventually blend into the newer ones. And it's
Right.
also interesting just to see the different styles and how that has changed over time with culture and society as well.
Oh, see, and I love symbols. I love symbols of all kinds. And studies semiotics, which is symbology, and the symbols that are in on tombstones and gravestones. I mean, you can learn so much about the person that's interred there because there's so many religious. Different religions have different symbols. There's the Masonic Lodge. There's different fraternities. I mean, there's so many different symbols, and you can tell with that and it's not really a testament so much to the person that's interred there as to the family that chose that
Mm-hmm.
tombstone. But the pearly gates, and you've got the one of my favorites is the hourglass. Sometimes you see the hourglass with wings, and that's a symbol of time fleeting. So cemeteries are just chock full, and I really don't think that people chose a tombstone for nobody else to see it.
Yeah.
I think it's a statement to not just their loved ones that'll come and visit, but to the ages that might come visit. And you talked about going into. I've always gone into cemeteries, just for the historic reasons. I love history. I love the history of a town. Anytime I go to a new town, visit for whatever reason, I try to go to the cemetery. This is going to sound so spooky, and I also try to go on a ghost tour because
Ah,
that's a great way to learn all the history, just like this crash course,
yeah.
and it gives you a real feel for the people that live there. And but I will say this, I'm very comfortable in a cemetery, but in our town of Montgomery, there's 3 historic cemeteries, and there was one that I had never gone into because it was the Black Cemetery. It's historic. It's been there for a long, long time, but it's also still being used. And I just didn't feel like I should go in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that anybody ever made me feel that way. I just felt like I would be intruding. And but there was a cache in there, a puzzle cache. And I took my daughter one day and we went in there and we loved it. And they have a gazebo in there. I mean, you wouldn't put a gazebo in a cemetery if you didn't want people to visit.
Yeah.
And so we loved it. It was our first puzzle cache. And it was my first visit to that cemetery, even though I had gone to the other 2 cemeteries in town many times. So I loved that.
Was the puzzle related to the history of the cemetery by chance?
Um, oh gosh, it's been so many years. It did talk about the history a little bit. It talked about when the cemetery had been founded, and that it was, unfortunately, very sadly, outside the city limits at that time. Because when it was established, segregation was very much a thing.
Right.
It did talk about that, and then it sent you to from certain historic tombstones to the next as you went, and so you got a little bit of the history, and it just to see how much that's another thing about looking at tombstones and looking at the different ones in cemeteries. You can tell almost who was queen of the town, not queen, but who was very much loved and who,
Yeah.
and so this puzzle cache gave you that feel for these people, and told you a little bit about the person, a little bit more about the person that was interred there than their tombstone did. It was really awesome. It was really awesome. I looked that one up recently again, and there's several do not finds on it, or did not find on it. So I wonder if it's still a viable geocache.
Mm. Hopefully the owner will check that one out and do maintenance on it. It sounds like it sounds really interesting. It sounds like it takes you to some interesting
It really
spots.
does. And I have one more story. This was so cool. I went on a road trip out of town, and not too long ago, just a couple months ago. And on my way back, I saw that there was a cemetery geocache. And so I stopped, and this was out in the middle of nowhere, this little bitty cemetery on this country road. And I went in there. It was beautiful. It had a gate. It was Ferris Family Cemetery in Madisonville, Texas. And so I took pictures, and there were tombstones, and there was a historical stone telling about the family. And I took a lot of pictures. I did not find that geocache because I really had to go to the bathroom. I really had
to pee. One downside to cemeteries and graveyards.
Well, it was wooded, and I'm not against squatting in the woods, but I am against squatting in the cemetery.
Yeah, now that does feel disrespectful.
Right. So I left with a did not find on there. And but I posted my pictures on Facebook, and one of my dearest friends, Karen, said, "That's my family cemetery." I had no idea. I had known her for years and never knew her maiden name. And that was her family cemetery. And she didn't know there was a cache in there.
Wow.
So she found out, and she was delighted.
That's neat. Yeah, unfortunately, our culture in the U.S. just does not really revolve around. Some families do evolve around going and visiting the cemetery to remember those who passed. But in my experience, most people that I talk to, when they remember or celebrate those who have passed, it's by sharing stories of them and not necessarily going to a gravesite. But you have so many cultures, other places in the world, where the families are responsible for keeping up the graves. And a well-kept grave is a sign of respect and shows that you have family that cared for you.
That's right. That's right. And it's funny because as much as I love cemeteries, I don't want to be buried. I would love to have a tombstone. I would, but I don't want to be buried. I think we're moving kind of a ecologically minded way of burial, or not burial, but of dealing with death. But visiting, my family still does. We go to, and I haven't been in a long time with them, but my husband's family as well as my family go and visit the graves of their loved ones and clean it off and make a day out of it. I don't know. I mean, they don't necessarily picnic or anything like that, but they do. They go and make a day out of it. And I know that my grandparents are buried several towns away. And so anytime any one of us heads out in that direction, we make a point of visiting and doing that. So, I mean, I think it just depends on your family and how you were raised and that sort of thing. But I do think that cemeteries over the last several years have become almost taboo.
I would agree with that. Although I do think with the pandemic, so, maybe not to a great extent. I think to some extent, people have started utilizing cemeteries during the pandemic a bit more like a park, in the sense of just being able to go out and walk someplace away from a bunch of people. I don't remember whether it was last summer or last fall, but in the midst of the pandemic, basically, I went out and I did a couple cemetery caches, and I was actually surprised by the number of people that I saw there walking on the paths, walking their dogs on the paths, just to be able to get out and go someplace different
That wasn't crowded.
that wasn't crowded,
Right.
and just be able to get outside. And I do think at least some people have started seeing that maybe this isn't such a horrible thing to go do. But I think in general, it is still very taboo here in the States for most people.
Right. Right. And I want to change that. Let's change that.
Let's try. Well, it's interesting because, like, my family never really went to go visit family at the cemetery. But if somebody else was buried, well, we're here at the cemetery, so let's go visit over here.
Right.
But then again, there would be other times where it's like, oh, hey, we're going to go, I just remember this one time we were at my grandma and grandpa's, and they had a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. And there was the one cemetery with the church inside of town, and there was one cemetery that wasn't part of the church outside of town. And the one inside the town was like a block from their house. And I just remember my grandma going, they put in the neatest tombstone the other day. Let's go see it.
Say, I would love your grandma then.
And it was just like, and nobody questioned it, was the thing. It was literally like, oh, okay, let's go see it. It was like, it was this laser engraved image on the back of the tombstone. I don't remember what it was, but that just sticks out in my memory, that it was, oh, okay, let's go do this. But nobody blinked twice. It was like, okay, let's go see the tombstone grandma wants us to go see. And I don't know whether it was because grandma wanted us to go see it or what. I was younger. I was under 12. So I was younger. So I was just like, okay, they say we're doing it. But none of the adults ever batted an eye. But then again, none of them, they never were the ones to take us to go visit family grave sites either. So that's probably why that stuck out in my head, because it was, for my family, not a common thing to just go walking in the graveyard for any reason. But nobody batted an eye because we were going to go look at this tombstone. So,
well, but it's interesting. Like, I mean, it probably, I don't know, but it probably was, look at all these cool tombstones, and you can't help but notice the difference throughout the years of the different symbols and the different types. And like, now you can see some portraits on the tombstones and everything. Well, I heard, and I haven't seen any like this, I heard that now, what is it, QR or QC codes or QR codes? QR codes. That there are some tombstones that now have QR codes that you can scan it and then find out about the person.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so if I can plug my podcast, we are doing an episode also on, I can't remember when it drops, but October 27th or something like that, about different kinds of curiously interred is what it's called. October 25th is when it is. Okay. And it's all about different weird, odd cemeteries and tombstones. And for instance, there's one of this little girl where they built her a dollhouse. That's her tombstone. She has this large dollhouse that other kids can go in and play.
Oh, wow.
Right on top of where she's buried. And so I just find it so interesting. And throughout the years and everything. And one of the things that I found out just here recently about I said that we have 3 historic cemeteries in our town. The reason, okay, and I think you wanted to mention the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. with a graveyard being in a churchyard,
Yeah,
right?
it's a very subtle difference, but
Well, so I never really realized there was a difference between a graveyard and cemetery. I've always used those as synonyms, but in our town we have a graveyard right off of the church, and then we have a cemetery further on. And I thought, and they're historic, they go back into the 1700s, or at least the churchyard one does. Um, I thought that it filled up during yellow fever pandemic, and that's the reason they started the other. No, there were some thieves that came into town and robbed the bank, and they were killed in town. And when they were buried, they didn't want to bury them in the churchyard,
yeah.
in the graveyard. So they created the new cemetery. And this was back in the 1800s. So it's the new cemetery. It's still the new cemetery. It's the newest cemetery we've got. And it's still being used today. But that's the reason that it was located outside of town. And so that's the reason that we have those two different cemeteries. We have the old and the new.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that's how a lot of those cemeteries that are not associated with churches got started, because it was non-members, non-believers, or criminals a lot of the times that they didn't want in the churchyard, or somebody that was excommunicated from the church or something that they did not want in the churchyard for whatever reason.
So with all of these fascinating facts to find out and to discover, why wouldn't you want to go to a cemetery? Why wouldn't you want to hide a cache in there? And I will have to say, you have to say this. You have to make this point that when you are looking for a geocache in a cemetery, other people that are in the cemetery, their needs trump your own. You've got to be, you've got to be respectful of that, and maybe leave and come back at another time.
I think that is the biggest takeaway for cemetery caches, whether you're hiding or finding, is you have to be respectful about it.
Absolutely.
If there's any services going on, you don't need to be there, in my opinion.
Services, definitely services. But even if you just notice somebody visiting, maybe needing some quiet time, and the cache is over near there, let's not go look.
Yeah, let's
not go look for it. Right.
Yeah, let's respect the mourners who are there.
Right.
But I personally don't think that the people that are interned at the cemetery or graveyard are going to be overly caring one way for the other if there's somebody visiting. So for whatever the reason is, I'm sure wherever we end up afterwards, it's great to know people are visiting. And I think people are, I know a lot of people that just wouldn't care as long as somebody was visiting. They wouldn't care if they showed up for a geocache or to take a picture of something or whatever, just because they stopped and they took the time to look at the tombstone and think about what that meant to somebody. Look at the dates and realize that represents a person.
Absolutely. I like to think that they enjoy it, that they enjoy the visitors. So, and then also, if you are going to visit a cemetery for whatever reason, always try to, and this is a mantra among geocachers, always try to leave it better than you found it. So, maybe take a plastic trash bag or something like that. Not a trash bag necessarily, but like a grocery bag. Small
Walmart bag or Target.
Right. To pick up some trash if you find it or whatever, and absolutely leave it in as good a shape as you found it, if not better.
Absolutely. Cash in, trash out whenever you can.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. And circle back around a bit. It's interesting that you mentioned the QR codes on grave sites, because near my area over in St. Louis, there is a cemetery called, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, the Bellefontaine Cemetery. Bellefontaine. Okay. It's been featured in Geocacher's FTF magazine. There are several geocaches there, several Where I Goes, Adventure Labs, there's a couple gadget caches, but what is really interesting to me, and I found out about this because I was looking at I haven't been there yet. I'm kind of planning out a trip to go do it one day when I get a chance to go check these out. In the description on one of the cache pages, it has a quote bonus trackable location where a geocacher, a person who's buried there, was a geocacher and loved it so much, there is a trackable code carved in their tombstone.
Oh, oh, that is cool.
So
That
you
is
know
very
they
cool.
want people to come.
That's right. That's right.
And check that out.
Oh, that is very cool.
Yeah, so that's on my ever-growing geocaching to-do list.
Oh, and one last story. I took my daughter, who's 14. I took her along one time on a geocaching. And again, this is in my town, but it's outside of the city limits, so it's a little further down a country road. And I took her to. We were just traveling that way. We had some time. I said, "Well, let's look up if there's any caches in the area." Well, it happened to be a cemetery cache at an abandoned church that I had passed. I've been passing this for, oh my goodness, 30 years and never noticed this place. And certainly never, I mean, I noticed the church, but I never noticed that it had been abandoned.
Yeah.
But I never noticed the cemetery. It was a little cemetery, and we went, she was totally creeped out. But we went, and the cache was right on the fence line of the cemetery, and I never would have known. I never would have known it was there. And the original minister of that church was interred there with his wife. I mean, there's just all this historic information on the plaque that, and then the second minister and his wife are also interred there. And it's just part of the history of our town that I had no idea about. And drug my daughter along, and she's like, "Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here." Let's get she was a little scared about it, but it was really cool. It was an abandoned cemetery I never knew was there.
That is cool. We actually last winter down in my husband's family's down in southern Missouri, so we go down there every year for like a family Christmas dinner in early December. And we were down there, and he does humor me when we have time, and he says, "Are there any geocaches in the area you want to check out?" And there was one that I found that was kind of outside of town. It's like, okay, we can hit that on the way home. He had no idea this place was here. And it happened to take us to, I'm not going to use the right term. I'll have to look it up later. It was like a poplar's cemetery. It was a cemetery it was a type of home for people that had nobody to take care of them.
Oh,
for like,
okay.
it was like different homeless that were in and out, or people who were not mentally stable or could not take care of themselves. And
Paupers.
They were at
a pauper's grave.
Yeah,
site.
paupers.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I said poplars, which is, I knew I was not going to get the word right. So, and the housing area is no longer there, but it was one of those places where they could live there if they would work to basically have for rent and
right
there. And a lot of the people that passed there were young teens and people with just nobody to bury them or anything. And there was the cemetery, almost all the graves were unmarked. There was like, I'm trying to remember, there was maybe 2 actual markers from the original sites. And I'd have to go back and pull up the cache description because it had the information on there. But at some point, I think it was the Historic Society found the records.
Oh, wow.
And they put a monument there.
Yeah.
With as much information as they could. And there's a lot of names on there that, it's just a first name, or it even just says a boy or a little girl because they don't know the name, and they don't even necessarily know the birthday or even necessarily the death date or year. Some of them don't even have a year associated to them either way on this marker. And it was just, it was kind of wild to see, because other than like this one or two other tombstones sitting there, you would have had no clue what this was. It just looked like it was this random place at a field.
Oh, wow. And as sad as that sounds, I also, oh my goodness, and I don't want to get too much into the spiritual and all of that kind of stuff, but I also think that you going there made you think of the people that were there. I mean, somebody thought of them, you know, they were on somebody's mind, and they were loved for that moment. So I think that
Yeah.
makes a difference. I really do.
It doesn't, even if it doesn't make a difference to those who have passed, I think it affects the person standing there thinking about it.
Absolutely.
Whether it's just because you learned about the history, or you're just overcome with emotion because of it, or it makes you think about life in general, I truly think it affects people.
Right. Right.
But
So cemetery caches, I absolutely recommend them. If they're not your thing, I get it. I understand it, but I think you're really missing out. I really do.
yeah, the only problem if you love cemetery caches is there's not an easy way to search for them in the app, because they don't have that attribute that you can search for.
Right.
Now,
Right.
sometimes they do have the name of the cemetery or cemetery listed in the name, depending
Right.
on how they set it up. But you just kind of have to know where the cemeteries are and
That's how I've
check the
always found
map to
them.
see. There's a couple near me where it's actually named like Howell Cemetery Cache. So it's pretty obvious that's a cemetery cache.
Right.
Yeah, most of them do not have that. So
So geocaching.com kind of,
yeah, come on, guys. Come on,
mess it up.
Groundspeak. Other people have mentioned this before.
But you know what? Okay, so that brings up a good point though, because there's some debate out there of whether or not in some countries or even in some states whether it's legal to
Yeah.
do this. And I know that I came up when researching for this interview, I came across a Reddit conversation about whether or not it was legal to do so in Tennessee, to hide a cache in a
I've
cemetery in
seen
Tennessee.
that at
Uh,
Tennessee, and there was another, maybe it was South Carolina. There was another
yeah,
state I saw
I
it.
think it was South Carolina.
I could
And
not find any actual, I found people, personal blogs and stuff that quoted that. I could not find any actual documentation, and it may just be that I don't know where to look.
right, right. But I'm thinking that maybe geocaching, the people at geocaching.com are mindful of maybe that it's a little controversial, and so they don't want to stir the pot, or
Maybe.
or if it is illegal and there are caches out there, maybe not bring it to light. I don't know. But
I have heard, and I don't know if it might be a state or maybe a city county thing, and I don't remember exactly where this was at, but I have heard that in some places playing games in cemeteries is banned. And if you look at geocaching as a game,
right.
then I could see where you make that correlation. Now I saw, and I'll list this one blog post in the show notes, but I saw a blog post where it was claiming that it specifically said geocaching in the list of banned activities.
But again, it was a conversation rather than an actual legal document,
Right. I
right?
could not find an actual legal document. And it may just be I'm not looking in the right place, and it may be because I'm not in the Tennessee courthouse looking up documentation.
Sure.
But
But the
it is interesting.
well, and it brings up the point that different states, different areas, and just different cemeteries have their own sets of rules, and you have to You have to at least be aware of that. Like, I don't know of any cemetery that's going to allow you to be there after dark. That most of them at the very least have the dawn to dusk times,
Yeah.
and that's it. Some of them even have set times that from this particular time to that particular time. And I know that the cemeteries in New Orleans, some of them you can't even go into unless you have family in there. And so you just have to be aware of the rules, and trespassing is just not a good thing to do.
Yes, in general, don't do that. Which is why it is always important to ask permission, obtain that permission before you place a geocache, no matter where you're trying to place it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is always so good to talk to you.
It has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and doing this. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you asking me. Thank you so much.
And I'll definitely link to the Remnant Stew social medias and pages because it is an awesome podcast. I'm a fan. I encourage others to go check it out. If you like anything that's kind of weird and obscure and maybe off the beaten path, go check it out.
You've got a pretty awesome podcast yourself. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed that interview between me and Leah. Maybe it'll inspire you to go find a cemetery cache and have a little Halloween fun of your own. Happy Halloween! You've been listening to Geocache Adventures with me, Shadow Dragon 1. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, or go to geocacheadventures.org and you can find the information on the contact page. Theme music is by The Travel Bugs. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have you heard of FTF Magazine? It's the magazine for geocachers. It is full of articles and pictures all submitted by geocachers just like you. I'm a subscriber myself, and I love it. My favorite part is the little snippets on the edges of the articles on all the different pages. Those are my favorites. Just go to ftfgeo.com to check them out and tell them Shadow Dragon 1 sent you.